All right, guys. Today, this is about imperialism and what happened during that time frame. Remember, we already looked at the progressive presidents. A lot of the same progressive presidents that we looked at last week are a part of imperialism. It's the same presidents in much respect. Okay, this is obviously not one of the presidents. This is an actress named Cindy Crawford that you guys probably don't recognize, but she is in here because Cindy Crawford, famous actress from like the 90s and stuff. And I always like showing this picture. And sometimes somebody will say, is that your wife? That's not my wife, although my wife does kind of look something like that. She was born in a place called DeKalb, Illinois, and that has meaning to what you're going to see about imperialism and our pressure to expand our territory. Okay, so Cindy Crawford, DeKalb, Illinois. Remember that. Okay. All right. So here's another picture. This is a map of some of the lands that we gain, things that are a part of the United States today, like Puerto Rico. Okay. But then you see the other ones in white there: Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Jamaica. Okay. Cuba and Puerto Rico and a lot of those smaller islands are a part of what we get during this empire-seeking era. Remember, this is imperialism. Okay. So here's the next one. This is a map of China. Which is also a part of this empire unit for us because of our policy, our foreign relations policy that we have with China. Remember, during this stretch, China was a mess. Okay, it's real important. Their government, there was nothing like it is today. They were disorganized. They had all kinds of internal problems. You can see how it's split up there, right? They had all kinds of problems. All right. So the next one, what's this? Like, why would I have a picture of a teddy bear? Seems weird, right? There'd be a picture of a teddy bear on this, right? Okay. And then this picture of a guy that some of you are like, I know him. That's Chandler from Friends, right? You're right. That's Chandler from Friends. His name is Matthew Perry. Okay. That name is real important. Not this guy. Okay. But the name Matthew Perry is real important to what happens in the imperialism unit. And it also applies to that right there, the Japan part of that. Okay, so teddy bear, Matthew Perry, all right, and then you remember this, right? American Progress, okay, how she's bringing the light, okay, out to the western part of the United States, right, where it was dark, and you can see that the Native Americans are going one way and the buffalo are going away from her, right? It's going to be bad news for the natives and Hispanics, right? But this is a part of expansion, which kind of gets you to that Cindy Crawford picture we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so this is the flag of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, okay, the Union Jack that flew all over the world, right? And this used to be the ruling flag of the United States, right? When we got our independence in 1776, we got it from England, okay? So we didn't want to be a part of their empire, okay? But then by 1876, really by 1900, we're really starting to push for our own empire to come to fruition, okay? Doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of hypocritical. To our credit, we don't do it for very long. What we discover is the same thing that England discovered, that building an empire is hard work, and protecting that empire, okay, when you have lands overseas, is really expensive and it's really tough, okay? All right, so the pressure to expand is the name of this. All right, so the pressure to expand, right? That's the name of this, right? So why do we need to get bigger? That's the question. Okay, remember we've talked about like Manifest Destiny. We had the Louisiana Purchase, right? And then you had the Mexican Cession after the U.S.-Mexican War. Well, we got all this land, right? Now, why do we need more? Okay, that becomes the question. That's the pressure people are putting on us to get bigger. All right, so interesting. All right, so imperialism, here's a couple, just the definition of it. A stronger nation attempts to create an empire, that's why the word imperialism is there, by dominating weaker countries, okay? To annex is to add land to an existing place, okay? Which is what the next one is too. Swansea, right? Annexed part of Fairview Heights, right? So annex is like our gym, right? You add on to something that you already have. So what America, in essence, is trying to do here is to annex more land for Americans, right? That's part of the pressure is we annex more land for Americans to go forward. Okay. So do you remember in the Lincoln assassination, the dude that got cut from ear to ear like this? That was a part of the assassination. Okay. And he was actually related to me. It's my brother's wife's like great grandpa. That dude's name was William Seward. Okay. But I told you then he survived. Okay, and he would continue to be the Secretary of State. So he was the Secretary of State for Lincoln, and then he becomes the Secretary of State for Johnson, Andrew Johnson, right? Remember the president that got impeached, people didn't like, right? Well, in 1867, he purchases this place from Russia, and people ripped William Seward for doing this. They called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Okay, so the question is, did he do the right thing, right? Well, what did he purchase? He purchased Alaska. Okay, the state, what is now the state of Alaska, we purchased from Russia. Russia wanted to get rid of it and thought this is stupid and useless. He bought it. And man, people freaked out. He got ripped because in those days, nobody from America was going to get to Alaska, hardly at all. It wasn't like you could just move out there and farm. It was all frozen. You couldn't farm it anyway. Remember, we think farming, right, at this time. So he got ripped big time, right? But check this out. Look at how big Alaska is. That's the real size of Alaska. Okay. And look at that. It's literally coast to coast of the United States, right? It's massive. People think Texas is our biggest state. It's not. It's not even close. Alaska is the biggest state in the United States. Okay. And what they found there in like the 1890s was there was a bunch of oil and a bunch of gold. All of a sudden, Seward wasn't so stupid. Okay, the problem for him is that he was dead. So he didn't get any credit for this. So the poor guy gets assassination attempt on his life during Lincoln. People forget that that happened to him. And then he purchases Alaska and gets laughed off the map for it. But it was a really good purchase, continues to be a really good purchase. There's so much oil and gasoline, well, what becomes gasoline underneath Alaska, that it's crazy. Okay, he's really, really made a good purchase. All right. All right, so economic growth, this is another reason. Remember, this is pressure for us to expand, pressure for us to build an empire. We were producing too many items for us to consume on our own. So we need new markets. So we need to go to a place like China where there's a bunch of people and we can sell our goods to the Chinese for cheap, right? Or Japan. Or we need to go to, the islands of the Caribbean. We need to go to Cuba. We need to go to the Philippines. We need to go to all these different places so that we can sell American goods, right? So there's pressure to expand. Okay, because we're looking for new places for people to go and we need to produce more good. We're already producing a bunch of goods. You remember like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? All of those factories all over New York City, they're producing tons of stuff. Well, there's too much stuff for people in just America to buy, so we need to expand, right? All right, so as a part of that expansion, a guy named Matthew Perry, not Chandler Bing, not the same guys, not the actor, because this was in 1853. He sailed into Tokyo Harbor to forcefully open trade with the Japanese and with Asia. We didn't fight. There was no war. Okay. What happened is he went into Tokyo Harbor and the Japanese said, we don't want to trade with you. The Japanese have a long history of never wanting to trade with anyone. Okay. And he went into Tokyo Harbor and said, hey, I'm from America. I got this U.S. Navy ship. We want to establish trade with you. And the Japanese said, no, get out of here. And he said, okay. So he goes back to his ship and I'm embellishing here, right? But he goes back to his ship and he takes the guns and points them at Japan, literally at the city of Tokyo. Okay. Goes back up and says, hey, look at my friends out here in Tokyo Harbor. Now will you trade with us? And with the guns pointed at them, the Japanese said, yeah, that seems like a really good idea. Okay, so he opened up trade in a small way in 1853, but over the next 50 years, that gets bigger. So you get into this age of imperialism, and now all of a sudden there's an American presence in Japan, okay, which means there's also an American presence in China. Okay, so we are expanding and becoming this big boy country now, okay, because we're doing pretty good in America, right? It's the place to be, all right? Now, just remember that because in 1941, when we start World War II, the Japanese now have a Navy and they want to expand their markets, okay, because they need more raw materials like oil. And so they attack Pearl Harbor, which gets us involved in World War II. Okay. All right. Matthew Perry. All right. So another thing that people say is, hey, if we're going to have all this stuff overseas, we need a stronger Navy. Okay. So a guy named Admiral Mahan, right? He says you need a strong Navy to protect America from these places overseas. You need a strong Navy to go to Japan, right? You need a strong Navy to go to the Philippines. You need a strong Navy to go to Europe. We got to protect ourselves. We can't get pushed around, right? So the Naval Act of 1890 was to build a larger Navy. And by 1900, 10 years later, we had one of the most powerful navies in the world. Thanks to, largely thanks to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Right? That guy, right, was the teddy bear. Okay. The American spirit was embodied in this guy, right? The teddy bear was named after our president, Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, so Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy, right, short for Theodore, he loved to hunt. And when he was a president, he was down in Mississippi and Alabama. I think he's on the border down there. And they had a little dispute. He was down there and somebody invited him to go hunting. So he went hunting on their land. And, you bring in the president to go hunting, you want him to kill something, right? So I think they were hunting for bears, right? I think they were hunting for bears or deer or some large animal, whatever. And Teddy Roosevelt didn't get anything. Now, he was a big outdoorsman, big hunter, right? And didn't get anything. So when he came back, the owner of the land had trapped a small bear for Teddy Roosevelt to kill so he could say that he killed a bear on this guy's land, right? So Teddy Roosevelt said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not what hunting is about. This is a sport between me and the animal. If you trap it, that's not what this is supposed to be. So he doesn't do it. He goes back to the White House. So when he goes back to the White House, there is that story circulates. They make a comic about it, right? And so people get that story. So there's a woman that had been making these bears, right, in her little small shop, right, like a modern day, today would be like a downtown Belleville shop, So this lady's made those bears, and the kids loved them. She'd sell them like crazy. So she wrote a letter to President Roosevelt because one of the kids said, hey, you should call these teddy bears after Theodore Roosevelt. So she wrote a letter to the president, and Theodore Roosevelt responded to the letter and said, yeah, you can do that if you want. I don't care, but nobody's going to want one of those. That's where the teddy bear comes from, right? That American spirit, right? That we're hunter, we're outdoorsmen. And so he wants to expand. He was the assistant secretary of the Navy during the 1890s. Okay. And as you saw yesterday in the assignment, when we talk about the Spanish-American War, which is a huge part of this, that same Teddy Roosevelt led a group of fighters called the Rough Riders, and the Rough Riders become this famous thing, and they're totally overblown by the journalists, right, that were around at the time. And so he becomes this hero, and he uses that, goes from the assistant secretary of the Navy to being the Rough Rider leader. And then in 1900, he becomes the vice president for William McKinley. And then in 1902, William McKinley is assassinated. Teddy Roosevelt becomes the president of the United States. So now we got this big Navy that he built up, and he's the president. Well, let's expand, brother. Let's get bigger. Okay. All right. So that's American spirit. That's Teddy Roosevelt. There's another guy that wrote this thesis and gave this big speech, and it became famous. And it was called the Frontier thesis. And it said that America was full of rugged individuals, right? And a part of Americana was moving to the West. Well, he said, we got to do something because we're out of room. Right. And part of the reason we're out of room involves Cindy Crawford. We'll get back to that in just a second. Okay. The other thing was social Darwinism, right? So all those factories and all those people that were dying off and all that stuff. Hey, Darwinism is the toughest survive. And so if you don't survive, you don't survive. And Teddy Roosevelt embodied that spirit, right? Like I showed you in the progressive part of this, his mom and his wife died on the same freaking day, and he overcame that to become the president of the United States, right? So tough, right? He was tough. All right. So the American spirit, right? The frontier thesis. The frontier gets shut down by this. Gets shut down by barbed wire. Okay. And there was a dude named Joseph Glidden who invented barbed wire, got the patent for barbed wire, and that shut down the plains. So places like Montana, places like South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, I don't know if anybody want to go there, but all of those places got shut down by barbed wire because now you couldn't go anywhere. You can see the cow there, right? The longhorn is mad because he can't get through that. All right. It was really inexpensive. You didn't need a bunch of trees because they didn't have those on the Great Plains. So he invented this. Now, where is he from? He's from DeKalb, Illinois, the same place as that beautiful actress on the first slide, Cindy Crawford. Okay, we are the Beverly East Lancers. The nickname of DeKalb High School, the Barbs. That's their nickname. Okay, they're the DeKalb Barbs because of Joseph Glidden, right? A guy from Illinois that influenced what happened in history. All right, so this is the angel, right, from the Manifest Destiny American Progress picture. Okay, the 3 reasons for us to expand, right? That's one of your questions. So what were 3 reasons, right? Why did we have to go forth? What position did Teddy Roosevelt have in our government? And how did we get Alaska? Okay, who was responsible for that? Be able to define annex and imperialism as well. Okay, all right. So this is a big lesson, right? And you saw this yesterday with the yellow journalists, right? And the Spanish-American War. Yellow journalists create stories to get people to read their newspaper, right? That still happens today. People accentuate the news to get us to watch. They embellish on the news to get us to watch shows that they want us to watch, right? To get to watch the news. And whenever a big news event happens, we all go, right? You go to your phone, you go to the TV to watch what's going on. That's the same thing. But hopefully in 2020, we've learned a lesson to consider the source of where something came from, right? So like this was a story 10 years ago that some people believed. Some people still believe this. Okay, that President Obama, right, is not an American, and he was a Muslim and from born in Kenya and was not born in the United States, should have never been president. Okay, sensationalist news story and a thing called the National Enquirer. That's kind of what yellow journalism is in today's world, and kind of what we see the news media do. Okay, that kind of wraps up those two things, and that's it. Imperialism, the pressure to expand new markets. Okay, we need more land because of rugged individualism. We have this powerful Navy. We need to use it.